I found the picture on a Friday night in a place that hadn't known light in 70 years. The asylum had been closed since 1952, condemned by the county after a patient riot and a fire that gutted the West Wing. They called it St. Augustine Home for the Feeble-Minded, back when cruelty still hid behind gentler words. I was part of the cleanup crew, night shift janitors hired by the state to clear the last debris before demolition. Most of the guys worked in pairs, but I preferred solitude. The place had a way of swallowing sound, and I liked the quiet, even if it pressed a little too close. The upper floors were a maze of empty wards, the walls a patchwork of mold and peeling green paint. The smell was old disinfectant and ash. My flashlight beam swept across doors with faded labels: hydrotherapy, restraint storage, observation 3. I'd been through dozens of buildings like this before, but something about St. Augustine's felt different. The silence wasn't dead, it was waiting. Near midnight, I reached Ward C, the oldest section, still untouched by the earlier crews. The door was chained shut, rust fused into the padlock. I could have ignored it, logged it as inaccessible. Instead, I pried it open with my crowbar, metal screaming in protest. Inside, dust hung thick as fog. The room was long and narrow, lined with small beds stripped of mattresses. At the far end, a desk slumped under the weight of old papers. I brushed off the top and found a leather-bound folder, its label half-burned. Patient 1912. Carter, Eleanor. Curiosity got the better of me. The folder held photographs, grainy black and whites, some torn, some spotted with mildew. Most showed medical staff standing with patients, blank-faced children in nightgowns. But one image was different. It wasn't medical, it was formal. A family portrait. 6 adults and a child stood outside a brick building. The man on the far left wore a suit and hat, holding the little girl in his arms. The women beside him were dressed in high-collared Edwardian fashion, all stiff posture and gloved hands. The photograph had a faint sepia tint, well preserved despite the decades. It might have been lovely, except for the child. Her face was wrong. Not deformed exactly, not blurred by age, just wrong. The proportions were off, the eyes too large, the pupils too wide. Her mouth curved in a way that suggested she understood more than she should. Even stranger, every adult in the photo seemed to be leaning slightly away from her, their bodies angled without realizing it. I ran a finger over the image. The paper felt cold, almost damp, as if it had been developed yesterday. I flipped it over. On the back, written in neat fountain pen script, "The Alvarez family, San Isidro, 1900. And below that, in smaller, shakier writing, "She's still watching." I tucked it into my coat pocket without thinking why. The next night, I told the foreman I'd take Ward C again. He laughed, said no one else wanted it anyway. "Those rooms give me the creeps," he admitted. "Feels like someone's still pacing the halls." Maybe he was right. That night, as I pushed the mop bucket down the corridor, I kept hearing something faint, a child's humming, just at the edge of hearing. Each time I stopped, it stopped too. The only thing moving was the beam of my flashlight across the cracked tiles. Around 2 a.m., I sat in the staff lounge, drinking from a thermos gone cold. The photo lay on the table, lit by a single work lamp. In this light, the family's expressions seemed to shift. The father's mouth twitched, the grandmother's eyes narrowed, the girl's pupils glistened wetly. I told myself it was pareidolia, your brain finding faces where there are none. But as I stared longer, I noticed something else, a reflection in the window behind them. A faint silhouette of another figure standing apart, taller than the others, head tilted slightly as if listening. I scanned the image again with my phone's flashlight, and the reflection seemed to grow clearer, a shape like a woman's outline, but the face blurred, smeared into nothing. My hands trembled. I dropped the photo, and for a second it felt like the floor tilted beneath me. The hum returned, louder this time, no longer behind walls but inside the room. A child's voice, low, rhythmic, almost melodic. When I looked down, the photo was gone. I tore the room apart, beneath the table, under the chair, behind the radiator. Nothing. Finally, I found it half-slipped beneath the door, as if pushed there from the other side. The paper was warm to the touch. That night, I dreamed of the asylum as it once was. Bright halls, polished brass fixtures, the smell of soap and starch. I walked down Ward C, only it wasn't empty anymore. A nurse passed me, smiling, her eyes glazed like porcelain. "You shouldn't have looked," she whispered. "They remember faces." When I woke, the photograph was lying on my chest, though I'd locked it in my locker. The following week, the county historian visited to document what was left before demolition. His name was Dr. Mallory, an old man with a soft voice and trembling hands. When I mentioned the Alvarez photo, his expression changed. "May I see it?" he asked. I handed it over. He studied it under the flickering light. "This family," he said slowly, "they weren't from here. The Alvarezes came from northern Mexico around the turn of the century, settled in the border towns. There were rumors, childbirths that didn't end right. A girl born in 1898 with differences. The locals called her La Nacida de la Noche, the nightborn. He traced the image of the child with a fingertip. They said she didn't cry when she came out. Didn't blink. She'd stare at people until they fainted. Then she'd laugh. He handed the photo back. The family disappeared around 1901. Some say the church burned their house down with them inside. But there were reports, decades later, of people seeing a little girl in the ruins, unchanged, still wearing that same plaid dress. Dr. Mallory smiled faintly, though his eyes were hollow. "Where did you find this again?" "In Ward C." He hesitated. "Do you know who was kept there?" I shook my head. "Children," he said. "They brought them here from orphanages, places that didn't want to deal with them. Some of them never spoke. Some didn't age. The doctors called it arrested development. But the nurses, they said those kids all dreamed of the same girl." He packed his notes quickly after that and left without another word. I tried not to go back to Ward C, but the place drew me. The air there was different, colder, denser, like it remembered breath. One night, the power cut out across the complex, plunging everything into darkness. I used my flashlight to navigate toward the generator, but the beam kept flickering. Each time it did, I caught glimpses of something in the periphery. A small figure standing at the end of the hall, head tilted, one hand raised as if waving. When I reached the generator room, I found a message scrawled in chalk across the wall. "She's still watching," the same phrase from the back of the photograph. I turned, and for a heartbeat, I saw her. The child from the photo, no older than 5 or 6, standing in the doorway. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes were too large, glossy and black like marbles. She opened her mouth, and the hum poured out again, low and soft, vibrating the air. I dropped the flashlight. The sound filled the room, growing louder until it wasn't sound at all, but pressure pushing against my chest. Then everything went black. When I woke, it was morning. I was lying in the parking lot outside, the generator back online, my clothes wet as though I'd been caught in rain. The foreman said he'd found me wandering near the fence, talking to someone who wasn't there. I quit that day. But the photo came with me. It was inside my toolbox, though I'd left it locked in the janitor's closet. After I quit, I thought I'd left St. Augustine behind. But 3 nights later, I found the photograph under my apartment door. No envelope. Just the same sepia image, edges curled like dried leaves. I threw it in the trash and took the bag straight to the dumpster. When I came back inside, it was sitting on my kitchen table, perfectly flat and clean. I started to think maybe the asylum had gotten into my head. Occupational hazard. Too many years in empty buildings. Too many echoes mistaken for whispers. I tried to ignore it, but that face wouldn't leave me. The child's eyes seemed to follow even when I wasn't looking at her. I'd catch her outline reflected in windows, faintly shimmering in the glass. Once, I saw her in the black screen of my television, standing behind me, though the room was empty. I decided to find out who she was. Real answers, not stories. I drove to the county records office, a squat building that smelled of mildew and fluorescent hum. A clerk named Dana helped me dig through old asylum ledgers. We found mention of a Carter Eleanor, same folder I'd opened. But there was also a cross-reference under admission record 1903, Alvarez, unidentified minor, female. The description was brief. Approximately age 6, origin unknown, exhibiting unusual ocular features. Parents deceased. Unusual ocular features, I muttered. That's one way to say it. Dana glanced over my shoulder. There's a note here. Child does not sleep. Pupils non-reactive to light. That's not medical. That's something else. Another file contained a faded photograph stapled to the corner. The same little girl, though younger, standing beside a nurse. Except the nurse's head was turned completely toward her, cheek almost touching, eyes blank, unfocused. Written at the bottom, do not engage eye contact, hypnotic risk. I photocopied everything and thanked Dana, but she didn't smile. You know they say the asylum wasn't closed because of the fire, she said. It was closed because the staff started seeing things. Like patients who weren't there. That night, my sleep was shallow and twitching. I dreamed of the asylum again. Only this time it wasn't abandoned. It was alive. The halls gleamed with lamplight, nurses gliding by like shadows in starch-white uniforms. At the end of the corridor, the child stood facing a wall, whispering to it. When I got closer, I realized she wasn't talking to the wall at all. She was speaking into something behind it, something that whispered back in a voice too deep to belong to any human throat. When I woke, my eyes burned, and the room reeked faintly of formaldehyde. The following morning, I visited Dr. Mallory. His office door was locked, the glass pane cracked. A neighbor told me the police had been by 2 nights earlier. They found him in his study, she said softly. Sitting upright at his desk, eyes wide open. Said his pupils were blown like he'd seen a flashbulb, but there wasn't one. I didn't need to ask if the photograph was there. I knew it was. That evening, I went through his online archive. Articles, notes, old digitized photographs. Buried deep in a folder labeled Folklore Southwest, 1900 to 1920, I found a journal entry translated from Spanish, dated 1901. They brought her to the mission after the eclipse. Her parents said she had not slept for days. When the priest tried to baptize her, the water boiled. The other children began to speak with her voice. We buried her behind the chapel that night, but by morning she was gone. Below that, Mallory had added his own typed note, possible connection to Alvarez case. Verify St. Augustine records, arrival July 1903. Subject appears unchanged from 1900 image. Investigate medical reports, arrested development, or replication. Replication. The word chilled me more than anything else. I told myself I was chasing history, that the horror lay only in misinterpretation. But late that night, while scanning the photo on my flatbed, the computer glitched. Screen flickering, static buzzing in the speakers. The image processed halfway, then froze. I leaned closer. The child's face had turned toward me. Not the version in the original scan. The pixels had rearranged. Her pupils were vertical now, cat-like, faintly glowing against the sepia tone. The file saved itself under a new name, 1912_stillwatching.jpg. I unplugged the machine and left the apartment. Outside, the streetlights buzzed faintly under mist. A figure stood on the opposite sidewalk, a small girl in a checkered dress. I called out, half expecting her to run. She didn't. She tilted her head, just slightly, then turned and vanished into the fog. I didn't follow. I couldn't move. Days passed. I stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping. The photo appeared in different places every morning: bathroom sink, kitchen counter, once tucked into the freezer between bags of ice. Each time, the child's expression shifted imperceptibly. A little more smile, a little less human. I decided to confront it at the source. If the asylum was where I found her, then maybe it could tell me how to send her back. The demolition had been delayed because of permits, so the structure still stood. I broke in through a maintenance hatch at dusk. The halls smelled of mold and time. My flashlight beam quivered over cracked tiles and rusted bed frames. Somewhere above, I heard a faint tapping, like fingernails on glass. I followed the sound back toward C. The door was ajar this time. The air was colder than the rest of the building. On the far wall, the chalk writing had returned, clearer now. She's learning. The photo was pinned beneath it, taped with old medical adhesive. But there was something new in the picture. The child was no longer being held by the man. She was standing on the ground, 1 foot forward, as though stepping out of the frame. The humming began again. Low, inside my head. I backed toward the hallway. The lights overhead flickered to life, even though the power had been cut for years. The hum grew sharper, faster, until it became words. Not English, not quite Spanish either. Something older, vowels stretched like breathing. I pressed my palms against my ears, but the sound came from inside. Then a voice, soft, feminine, adult. She can see you now. I turned. A woman stood by the doorway, dressed in a nurse's uniform decades out of date. Her face was half burned, features melted smooth on one side. "Who are you?" I asked. "The caretaker," she said. "We thought the fire ended it." We were wrong. I could barely speak. "What is she?" "Not born. Made. They called her an angel once before they realized angels don't blink." The nurse's remaining eye glistened wetly. "She grows when someone looks long enough. The photo is how she learns faces. You gave her yours." The floor trembled beneath us. Dust rained from the ceiling. How do I stop it? Don't photograph her again. Don't let her remember you. Then the nurse turned toward the corridor. Her body stiffened, then folded like paper, collapsing inward until nothing remained but her shoes. The hum stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I left the asylum and drove straight home. I wanted to believe it had been a hallucination, a mix of stress and exhaustion. But the next morning, my phone lit up with a notification. New image received. No sender, just the same file name, 1912_stillwatching.jpg. I opened it despite myself. This time, there was no family, just the child alone, standing against a blank backdrop, one hand lifted toward the camera. Her shadow stretched behind her, long and distorted. Except it wasn't hers. The shadow was mine. That was the moment I understood. The photo wasn't capturing her anymore. It was replacing me. That evening, Dana from the records office called. "You need to come back," she said, her voice trembling. "There's something here you should see." When I arrived, she led me to the basement archives. The lights flickered as we walked. "I was checking your asylum request," she explained. "Found another reference. Patient photographs dated 1904. Only one remains." She unlocked a drawer and pulled out a folder wrapped in cloth. Inside was a single photograph, aged but clear. 7 figures stood outside the asylum. 6 were adults in medical coats. The 7th was a man in a janitor's uniform, standing slightly behind them, holding a mop. His face was blurred. I felt my stomach twist. "Look at the inscription," Dana said. Scrawled in pencil at the bottom, "St. Augustine Home for the Feeble-Minded, 1904, Mr. Moreno and staff." My name. The same as mine. "It can't be," I whispered. Dana frowned. "Your family from around here?" "No," I said, but I wasn't sure anymore. That night I went through old family documents, birth certificates, immigration records. My grandfather's name was erased on half the paperwork. But one page survived. Employment, St. Augustine Home, janitor, 1903 to 1904. I stared at it until dawn. The child's face lingered behind my eyelids every time I blinked. Maybe she wasn't haunting me. Maybe she was remembering me. Across generations, across time. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of standing beside my grandfather in that same brick courtyard, the child between us. She reached for my hand and said, "It's your turn." I drove back to St. Augustine on the coldest night of the year. No one knew I was coming. No one would have stopped me if they had. The county had fenced the property, hung warning signs, and left it to rot beneath a sky swollen with winter clouds. But the padlocks were easy, rusted through, same as everything else. The wind sounded like breathing through broken teeth. The photograph rode in the passenger seat beside me. I'd tried burning it earlier that evening, 3 separate times. Each time, the flame died before touching paper, as if the air around it refused combustion. So I'd done the only thing left. Wrapped it in brown cloth, drove to where it wanted me. When the asylum came into view, my headlights caught the front doors hanging open. Someone had been there since my last visit, or something had been waiting. Inside, snow sifted through holes in the ceiling, drifting onto the black and white tiles like ash. The air tasted metallic, sharp, electric, as though every atom expected lightning. I moved through the corridors with my flashlight, its beam thin and nervous. Every step echoed down the hall, a delayed heartbeat that came back a half-second too late. Ward C's door stood wide now, its hinges groaning in the wind. The chalk writing was gone, wiped clean. In its place, something new had been etched into the plaster with fingernails. "She remembers." I laid the photograph on the floor beneath it. "Then let her see me," I whispered. The hum began instantly. That low, insect wing vibration I'd heard 100 times, but never this close. It crawled through bone rather than air. The overhead bulbs, dead for 70 years, flickered to life, each one bursting in sequence down the corridor until I stood under the last intact light. It glowed a sickly amber, the color of old developer fluid. From the far end of the ward came a shuffle, bare feet across tile. The girl appeared from the darkness, small, calm, dressed in that same plaid dress, stiff with age. Her eyes caught the light and didn't reflect it. They swallowed it whole. "You're not supposed to exist," I said. She tilted her head. Her voice, when it came, was 2 voices at once, the lilt of a child and the vibration of something far deeper. "Neither are you." The smell of wet earth filled the room. Behind her, shapes began forming in the gloom, flickers of the Alvarez family, their sepia outlines trembling like half-developed film. They didn't move except to breathe. Each inhalation sounded like paper tearing. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you looked," she said simply. "You opened the door that your blood had built." I remembered the file, the photograph of my grandfather in his janitor's uniform. "We cleaned up after you," I murmured. "That's all we did." "You kept me," she said. "Each generation keeps me." The family figures behind her shifted forward, their feet never touching the floor. They circled us, faint halos of light bleeding from their eyes. One reached out, a man's hand, smoke where skin should be, and touched my arm. Instantly, my mind flooded with images. The year 1900, a desert mission under an eclipse, a child born without pulse, eyes open, a priest whispering Dios mío as baptismal water boiled. I tore free, gasping. "What are you?" I asked again. She smiled, small and precise. "I am what's left when the picture forgets the camera." The walls shivered, tiles popped like knuckles. Through the cracks, something glowed, a soft white light that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. She stepped closer. Every time they tried to destroy me, someone remembered. Every time they buried me, someone dug up the story. You carried the last piece. I realized then that her pupils weren't black at all. They were mirrors. In them I saw my reflection, not present day but younger, standing in bright sunlight beside my grandfather. And between us, the child. She blinked once, and the image froze like a photograph. The hum crescendoed into a steady tone, the sound of a shutter holding open too long. The light burst outward, flooding everything. When it faded, the asylum was gone. I was standing in the same courtyard as the 1900 family portrait. The air was heavy with summer heat, the smell of iron and salt. The Alvarez family posed in front of the camera, alive, smiling nervously. The photographer adjusted his tripod. He looked exactly like me. The realization knocked the breath out of my lungs. I wasn't watching history. I was history. The child turned toward me, though in this time she was flesh and blood, her skin the color of candle wax. She reached up, touched my face, and said in perfect English, "Hold still." The flash went off. When I woke, I was back in Ward C, the floor slick with melted snow. My flashlight lay broken beside me. On the wall hung a new photograph, still damp, pinned by a rusted nail. It showed a man in a janitor's uniform standing beside a little girl in a plaid dress. Both smiling, both staring straight at the lens. The girl in the picture wasn't her anymore. It was me. And the man was someone I didn't recognize, older, maybe 40, maybe 50, his features half erased by light. Beneath it, written in chalk, "She's learning your name." I ran. Down the corridor, down the stairwell, out through the front doors into the white of morning snow. But the world outside wasn't right. The road was gone, the fence missing. Only flat fields stretching to the horizon, dotted with hundreds of standing figures, copies of the Alvarez family, row after row, frozen mid-pose, eyes black and unblinking. Each one clutched a photograph to its chest. Each one bore a faint resemblance to me. The child stepped beside me, barefoot on the snow that didn't melt under her feet. "Pictures keep things safe," she said softly. "Now you'll never leave." I fell to my knees, screaming until my throat tore. The sound didn't echo, it folded in on itself, absorbed by the blank sky. The last thing I saw before the world went white was her face, smiling, kind, utterly alien, as she raised a camera and pressed the shutter. They say the demolition finally happened that spring. Workers found nothing inside the asylum but dust and hundreds of photographs stuck to the walls. Each showed the same child with a different man standing beside her. The men's faces were blurred, but every uniform was the same, janitor's grey. One of the crew pocketed a photo as a souvenir. A week later, he didn't show up for work. When the foreman checked his locker, the photo was gone, replaced by a new one. In it, the missing man stood beside the little girl, smiling faintly. No one goes near the site now. They say sometimes on foggy nights, a faint humming drifts from the empty field, the sound of a camera winding, searching for its next subject. And if you ever find an old family portrait from around 1900 with a child whose eyes are too dark, whose smile is too knowing, Don't look too long. She's still learning faces,